Realism is always a very sensitive subject in video games because when you try to make a realistic game, people will say, hey, it's supposed to be a game. Don't make me work 10 hours just to carve out a piece of wood so I can make a table and then set it on fire and then lock people inside the house where I set fire to the table and watch them burn. I think maybe we're not playing exactly the same games, but there is a way that you can tell exactly how realistic a game is. Actually, there's more than one. This is the top 7 ways to tell if a game is realistic. A way of determining if the developer of the game actually had the intention of making a game that sort of feels a bit more like real life and not just an endless corridor where you shoot things and common sense has no bearing on anything ever. That being said, let's get it started with number 7. You can see your feet. Now this is relegated more towards the first-person type of game, be it shooter, RPG, adventure, whatever you want to call it, anything that is first-person. If your character has feet, you know that they were at least sort of envisioning you actually being a character in the game that exists physically there and not just a floating camera that does stuff. Because let's face it, in most games, your floating camera that does stuff and interaction with the environment is sort of minimal and people sort of just acknowledge your semi-existence. But if you have feet, well, that's taking things to a whole new level. You are there. You're palpable. You're tangible. You can see the way your feet move around and sort of get stuck in places they shouldn't. And sometimes the feet are mostly attached to the camera and not actually bolted to the floor like they should be, so you're still sort of stuck in the floating camera scenario. But at least they're trying, and then it's something. I mean, so what that you're lying on your back and you move your vision around a bit and then you see your legs sort of just go through a window for no reason, like they were attached to your eyes, because the game sort of doesn't understand that you have a neck, and when it does, you end up seeing the back of your neck, like you tend to see in Arma. But still, it's a sign that they were at least going for realism up to a point. Number 6. Laws exist for everyone. Now, you may have seen games that tout a certain sense of believability, if not realism per se. Games where there are things like guards in towns and those guards are supposed to be guarding everybody around, but technically they're just guarding everybody from you because the AI is linked to itself and it knows pretty much everything you do, and it knows that when a crime is committed, it's not someone else it should be looking for, it's always you, because nobody else can commit a crime. And when, let's say, you punch someone and then run because they're chasing you and you go in front of a guard and that guy punches you in front of the guard doesn't say, hey, you stop punching that innocent man that was running from you. No, the guard attacks you and kills you. That's not realistic, is it? No. A realistic game would take into account that laws exist for everybody, and not just crime and punishment laws, other laws too, very important ones like gravity, or laws that pertain to solid objects should not be able to sort of phase through each other when it's convenient, or if for some reason an enemy is immune to all types of damage, or an NPC is immune to certain types of damage, even though they have no reason to be. Now, even though it's not really realistic, a game that really surprised me about being authentic in this part was Fallout 3. The NPCs in Megatown could fall from great heights and die, or they could just stand around in the irradiated water for too long and die from the radiation, like they should have probably done years ago. Now that you think about it, I mean, they've been worshipping that nuke for ages. Everybody there should have been already dead from the radiation in the groundwater, in the earth. Everybody was already dead when he blew it up, weren't they? That explains everything. Speaking of that, number 5. NPCs that actually live. Initially, this was entitled NPCs that don't stand out in the rain at night for no reason, like scripted morons. Which is again something you would see in Bethesda games. Morrowind, where they would stand there with torches at night in the rain in Balmorra for no reason. They just stood there because that's where you found them the first time you saw them, and they never had any place to go. They were idiots. They were just scripted idiots that are not meant to represent actual living beings. They're not real. They don't even pretend to be real. No credibility in them. They're puppets. Not even puppets. They're stone blocks on wheels. That's a way to absolutely destroy any sense of tangible believability in the game. Now, this did improve in Bethesda games to the point where you had them die from falling off high buildings and get irradiated and die because of that. And they did have sleep schedules now, but the thing is, they're still kind of way behind pretty much in every aspect compared to what Piranha Bytes has been doing since the dawn of time. What with Gothic having NPCs that didn't just go to bed, wake up and go to work. No, they ate lunch, they cooked, they smoked pot and got wasted all night, and you could party with them, and they would walk everywhere. There was no teleportation. They would go to places. You could find them running around going to places. Unless there was a wizard involved in actual teleportation. And Gothic wasn't the first series to do this. This has been a thing in games and RPGs since the Ultima series. In ages long past where things were relegated to being 2D representations of very squiggly and square and pixelated people, where you had to express the character of an entire person in just 10 blotches on the screen, and somehow that was more realistic than Morrowind, more believable in the way that characters worked. And at the same time, Morrowind is somehow, even though ancient by today's standards, still more believable than Skyrim because at least it has depth. Number 4. No magic spawning monster closets. This comes from the same idea as the NPCs that have to go places, and by going there they actually have to traverse a certain area. They have to move. Having a game that has infinitely spawning monsters from a closet really destroys any sense of reality, because if monsters can do that, why isn't the entire globe already filled with them and they're killing everybody? Why haven't they already won? A game that aims for believability will have not just a limited number of monsters, of enemies, of creatures of darkness, of Nazis and all sorts of mutants and stuff. It'll have a reason for them to be there. You won't find in a game like this 10 crooks or 10 bandits, 10 cutthroats respawning infinitely in the same forest for no reason. A forest where nobody except the people killing them go there. No, instead you'll find that bandits sort of go around trading routes. If the world dries up, they move somewhere else. It's sort of like what the Ultima Online had at first, with its ecology where there would be predators and herbivores, and they would interact with each other, and the players just killed everything, so they dropped the idea. It's sort of like what EverQuest Next would have had, not just applied to the ecosystem of little animals, but to people, to orcs, to monsters in general. And that got cancelled too. The entire game this time, because Hezi is popular and remaking the MMO genre in a new form that's going to spearhead the branding age for everybody is not popular. It's expensive and hard to make, and it's in cashing in on a trend. Number 3, you can steal anything, and I mean anything. A good sign of realism in the game is that you can pretty much grab everything you see and stuff it down your pants. Okay, so usually you will have magic pants that for some reason can fit ladders, tables, paintings. I am not as against that idea as I am against the idea that, oh, you see something but you can't pick it up for some reason. That's dumber. Being able to steal anything that isn't nailed down is a staple of a game that tries itself to be realistic. It tells you that, hey, this is a world that exists, and because it exists, you can steal everything in it. Okay, so go and rob everybody. But it does have a bit of a disadvantage to it, because in a game where you can pretty much pick up anything, the developer will insist on putting things that can be picked up everywhere. So, for example, in The Witcher 3, where you find some orphans in a shack asking about food, if you dig around their shack, you find food. Or if you find some farmers complaining, oh, we're poor, we're such destitute and desolate, and they do have a really crappy house. It's really dingy and horrible to live in. They somehow have sapphires in them, and that just breaks all sense of realism. Whereas in something like Divinity Original Sin, you could become an international art thief, and you could fund your adventures by just breaking into everybody's house and stealing all their paintings, all their silverware, stealing everything they had and selling it somewhere, usually to the guy with the chicken, if he had enough money. Though in some games you can pretty much steal something right in front of an NPC and then sell it back to them. It's kind of annoying when you do it with unique items, or items that seem unique, and you sort of understand that the character selling the item would know what it is and wouldn't buy it back, but it does anyway, because some NPCs are stupid. Speaking of stealing and selling and stupidity. Number 2, an economy that isn't awful. The economy in most games, especially RPGs, tends to be horrible. And I mean absolutely dreadful. It's not made so that you will ever actually need to spend money on it, or it's made so it's presumed that you will have mountains and gigantic mountains of money because everything scales to the level. Everything increases in price to the point where you think, wait a minute, why are you living in a tent if you're selling this sword that has 10 times the power of the legendary fabled blade that killed God? Oh, and you have axes and staves and spears that all have equally high statistics, and yet you're homeless, living in a tent somewhere unwashed, and you look like you haven't eaten ever. Tell me if I'm not describing pretty much half the NPCs you've ever seen in an RPG selling you weapons. How do those people exist there? Why don't they just lower the price so me, the hero of legend, can go and kill the evil and make his life better and pay him in the process? The economy makes no sense. It's an entirely an industrial quest economy, a heroic war economy. Everybody's profiting from war. They do it even though helping you would be beneficial to everybody. They will do their best to take every nickel and dime you have for the slightest thing possible. That or they realized at one point when developing the game that you were gonna have a butt ton of money that would be basically worthless, so they increased the price, they scaled everything so that you will actually have what some would say a use for that money. But some games have managed to circumvent that. Now, it's been a while since I played it and I only got to about a level 50 or 60, but I think Path of Exile did a good job of it. In Path of Exile you don't have gold. You've got pieces of junk that you basically transform into other pieces of junk, and those pieces of junk into something usable that you need and actually use up and are actually perishable, and yeah, you can stockpile them, but you will need them, and not just for buying stuff, but for actually improving your gear and stuff. And everybody there is a criminal, so they pretty much don't care if you live or die, or something like that. It's more believable than anything you would see in Diablo, though technically worth having one item on him that would be highly prized. I buy that a lot more than NPCs in games like Neverwinter Nights. I think there was a kid in Neverwinter Nights that had a bunch of medium to high-end gear on him. Like on him. You would not see where he would be storing the weapons. He would just have them in his underwear or something. Again, magic pants. I mean, you could have had a bag of holding, I guess. And number 1 is, you end up doing stuff unrelated to the main game itself because you're in a living, breathing world with its own functional laws, interacting systems that let you enjoy yourself in a new and emergent way that you never thought you could, and you keep finding new ways constantly. Yeah, that's a mouthful, but that's basically the goal of a realistic game, of a game that claims to have a realism at its core, that tries to be believable. It is made out of systems interacting with each other, and those systems, by interacting with each other in ways that are not completely predictable, that are not completely scripted, that are not from the onset going to go in exactly the way you would have thought they would every time, are going to generate, I wouldn't say infinite, but highly replayable situations and engagement and gameplay that you would not think would be there at the beginning. I think it was Warren Spector's dream to make a city block. And I mean just a city block in a game. One where characters have their own lives, where they interact with each other based on their existence, their limited to a point AI system, and where you can interact with them and change what they do, where they react to you and you to them, and to the set laws of this universe. That's like a holy grail of design right there. You can tell an infinite amount of stories there, stories that are better and more engaging and more interesting than you would see in a scripted game, because those are stories that you play. They are not stories told at you through the game, which is what we mostly get. It's actually kind of sad because some people, when they say, well, games can do stories, have you played Mount & Blade? The story that you play in Mount & Blade is fantastic. It can have turns in it that rival Game of Thrones, and most of it doesn't involve a single line of scripted dialogue, just actions, consequences, and an endlessly evolving interaction with the game's world. So with number 0, a goddamn door. I do believe there would be just 7 of these, but no, there has to be one supreme element to show that the game you're playing is trying to be realistic. You're in front of a door. The door is locked. You do not have a key to the door. Can you open the door? If the game tries to be in any way realistic, yes, you can open the door. You can ram your head into it until either you break or it does. You can use your goddamn rocket launcher to blow it open. You can use your space industrial mega laser saw built to cut apart planets to open this wooden door. You can pick the lock. You can shoot off the lock. You can break down the wall around it. But in a game that has no realism in it, a locked door will always be a locked door, even though that door being opened would save you the trouble of walking all the way around the level. A game that aims for complete and true and utter realism would even have as a solution to this problem the ability for you to level the entire building, because screw the door. It's not the boss of you. This is your game. I'm curious to see what other examples would you have of a game being realistic. What do you use personally as a barometer, as an indicator, as a measuring stick for the realism of a game? Please say so in the comments. Goodbye.